Thank you for watching Scary Bear Attacks. If you like this episode, please remember to hit the like button and leave a comment or two, then subscribe and click on the bell to receive notifications of whenever we release new videos. Also, please remember to share them to your social media. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us to the Appalachian Trail near a town called Glasgow, Virginia. The AT, as it is known in hiking circles, starts or ends at the peak of Springer Mountain on the border of Fannin and Gilmer counties in North Georgia. It winds its way through the states of Georgia, North Carolina, Tennessee, Virginia, West Virginia, Maryland, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Vermont, and New Hampshire, and ends in Maine. Most of the states that the AT goes through have bear attacks that have been featured on one episode or another on our channel. It covers 2,198.4 miles, and most of those miles are through prime bear habitat. The trail hosts about 3 million hikers each year, and most of those are day hikers. Through hiking, by contrast, is hiking the entire trail in one 12-month period from beginning to end. It requires much more planning and discipline, as coordinating the supply drops and support materials can be logistically challenging. As you can imagine, the topography and geography of the trail varies, but primarily consists of steep peaks and trails piercing through thick forests of pine, maple, fir, oak, spruce, and hickory. The undergrowth over most of the trail length is so thick that visibility is limited to under a few yards in much of it. Animals that you may run into while hiking include white-tailed deer, elk, turkeys, and a myriad of smaller animals like skunks, possums, and raccoons. The predators along the AT include bobcats, coyotes, and black bears. Near the tiny town of Glasgow, Virginia, the AT crosses the James River. Due to the proximity of the town, AT hikers often stop there to stock up on supplies before continuing on their trek. Resting near a restocking location allows some hikers to refresh not only their supplies, but also their spirits. They pitch their tents and campsites dedicated to them along the trail and approaching the town. Lilly and Town were AT through hikers and were about 2 months into their hike when they reached the area around Glasgow. The month was May 2023, but as you can imagine, after hiking for 2 months, the pair had no idea what the precise day of the month was. Given that weather doesn't always cooperate with hiking plans and motivation varies day by day, the couple didn't generally hold too tightly to reaching their waypoints in their planned route. Taking it day by day and camping in enchanting places instead of your planned locations add to the freedom and adventure of the experience. On the day in question, the hikers had reached their last big climb of the day by late afternoon and were searching for a place to pitch camp for the night. Hoping to cover a few more miles before that, they decided that they would pitch camp around 7:30 p.m., wherever they found themselves to be. Previously in the day, they'd crossed a road to re-enter the trailhead where they'd met up with some hikers headed in the other direction. As they passed each other, the hiking group conveyed that the campground known as Matt's Creek Shelter was closed due to a bear being seen in the area. Lilly and Town thanked the hikers for their information and continued on their way up the trail. Given that their waypoints weren't etched in stone, Lilly and Town weren't exactly sure how far Matt's Creek Shelter was. They weren't sure if they were even planning on staying there, but decided to cross that bridge when they got to it. Bear activity was a common topic of conversation for the hikers on the AT, so the fact that it was mentioned didn't draw too much attention from either of the hikers. They'd already passed several signs relaying the fact that bears had stolen food caches suspended from trees, so reports of bear activity were not as alarming as they should have been. Now, Matt's Creek Shelter lies on the west side of the James River. Lilly and Town were close to pitching camp for the night, and it was the nearest campsite to them. Their options were to stop before Matt's Creek or to cross the river before pitching camp. As they hiked, they passed a beautiful campsite, which was still outside the boundary of the closed portion of the trail. The campsite had a great view of the James River and was technically outside the closed area, but only by a little bit. The day's hike was grueling at times, and rolling out their bedrolls on the thick layer of pine duff was all too comfortable. Lilly and Town wolfed down their dinner and cached their food about 50 yards from their campsite, safely out of the reach of any hungry bears. The method they use to cache their food bag is called the PCT method, named after the recommended method used along the Pacific Crest Trail. It requires suspending your food bag over a high limb no lower than 12 feet from the ground. The cache should be more than 6 feet from the tree trunk and 4 feet lower than the branch to prevent bears from climbing the tree and pulling the rope toward themselves. For those of you who are interested in learning this caching technique, I've linked to an instructional video in the video article below this video. On a side note, rangers along the trail system have noted that bears have watched hikers as they cache their food bags. They've learned that untying the knot tethering the cache to the base of the same tree can yield free meals. The PCT method of caching can disrupt this learning-based reward system, even though it may take up to 30 years for the bears that have learned this lesson to fade from the population. At about 8:45 p.m., Lilly and Town settled into their sleeping bags as the darkness chased the last bit of twilight from the evening sky. The nighttime noises of the forest surrounded the hikers, and their slumber had only started by the time it was unceremoniously interrupted. A little after 9 p.m., Lilly was awakened by the sound of heavy, deep breaths through her tent and very close to her face. Hoping it was part of a dream, she froze and listened to confirm her fears. The sound of sniffing disrupted her consolation and was followed by the sound of very heavy footfalls, which made their way around the tent. Judging by the thud of the footfalls, Lilly knew this was no small animal. It could only have been a large bear. She shook Town from his sleep and told him there was a bear outside their tent. The two raised a chorus of "Hey bear" for over a minute, hoping that it would be all the animal would need to be convinced to leave them alone. Each chorus was followed by attentive listening, as the hikers eagerly awaited for the sound of departing footfalls. As soon as the bear heard the humans, it was likely perplexed by its lack of ability to visually locate them. It huffed loudly and stomped toward them, but given it didn't see them, stomped on the ground at the edge of their tent. It seemed the bear was trying to flush them from their hiding spot by bluff charging them. Given the bear didn't immediately crash through the brush in a hasty departure, Town knew this was a bad situation. He ordered Lilly to call 911. After barking out the order, he reached over to retrieve his knife and a whistle he carried in his backpack. Lilly pulled out her cell phone and had somehow managed to get 2 bars of reception. The location they chose was narrowly sufficient to place the call for emergency services. Town stammered out that this wasn't a normal bear, as it wasn't scared of them. He blew loud blasts from his whistle and thumped on the tent poles to frighten the bear away. Lilly would be connected with the Blue Ridge Parkway Deputies for the next 90 long minutes. Now, usually when a caller dials 911, they're in or near a house, road, or other landmark they can relay their location. Lilly and Town were out in the woods, and realistically beyond the typical service area of first responders. The dispatchers went back and forth with Lilly, trying to understand exactly how responders could get to them, but they were not familiar with the trail and its intricacies. After ironing out the hikers' rough location, dispatch sent responders to the camp, but they were at least 30 minutes away. Lilly and Town were instructed to stay inside their tent, but expressed that they were not comfortable staying inside it because they couldn't see the bear. They thought that trying to make it back out to nearby Highway 3 would be a safer bet, but they were overruled by the dispatcher. If responders could not locate them, they would not be able to ensure the safety of the hikers. As responders scrambled to round up a means to reach the hikers, the bear huffed and chuffed at them through the tent fabric. The hikers positioned themselves as far away from the tent edges as possible, and huddled in fear as the time passed slowly. As they waited for responders, Lilly received a call from the wildlife officer. The officer inquired about where their food was cached, and Lilly explained how they'd stored it. After confirming it was cached properly, the officer asked where they had cooked their food in relation to their tent. Lilly explained that their cooking location was only about 10 yards from their tent. After receiving that information, the officer asked them if there was any way they could cover up that location with something. The officer's next line of questioning was regarding protection. He asked them if they'd brought a firearm along with them. Lilly indicated that they only had a knife. The officer advised them to take the knife and a few other things to throw at the bear as they left the tent. After all, the bear shouldn't be interested in eating the people, only wanted the food it smelled. By this time, Town's headlamp was out of battery power, as was his cell phone, while both of Lilly's devices were just about there. The couple had decided that staying in the tent was a greater risk than leaving it. They planned to quickly hike their way through the dark to Highway 3, where help would be waiting, hopefully. Lilly gathered 2 water containers and the knife sheath to throw at the bear as they made their escape from the tent. They planned for Town to leave the tent first, closely followed by Lilly and her headlamp. Looking around, Town couldn't locate the bear in the darkness. Lilly emerged from the tent and immediately located it using her headlamp. It was standing only 15 feet away, sniffing the ground. Lilly began launching her impromptu projectile collection in the bear's direction. As each item landed near it, the bear showed little to no reaction. The only reaction the hikers got from the bear was a blank and prolonged stare. Lilly and Town backed away from the bear and toward the bushes that lined the trail on their escape route. The bear didn't do anything but watch them as they slowly made their way. As soon as the bear disappeared from their sight, the hikers took several quick steps in the opposite direction before they heard a rustling from the bushes nearby them. The rustling noise was not coming from their campsite, but from the opposite direction. The hikers watched in horror as a second black bear stepped onto the trail, only about 20 feet from where they stood. Lilly was still on the phone with the 911 dispatcher and let fly a few expletives as she saw the second bear. At this point, Town was carrying his knife and empty backpack, while Lilly had only her dying phone and headlamp. The dispatcher relayed instructions to the hikers to back slowly away from the bear, while keeping an eye on it. This was the start of a terrifying game of cat and mouse. As the hikers slowly crept backward down the trail, the bear maintained their pace. It stayed the same distance away from them as they went. Lilly relayed the bear's persistence to the dispatcher, who asked them if they had anything with scent they could drop. The only thing that they could afford to lay down was Town's backpack, so he placed it on the trail, and they slowly retreated from it. As the bear lumbered toward Town's backpack, it lowered its nose to it. It sniffed quick puffs and then raised its head once again. An agonizing sensation took over Town and Lilly as they watched the paws of the bear reach past the backpack and in their direction. Lilly began to lose her composure after watching the bear continue past the backpack. Her excited and fearful tone relayed to the dispatcher that the bear was still following them and that they had nothing it could want. But she was thinking that this was a typical bear and not a bear considering humans as prey. That is when one of their few remaining connections with the outside world collapsed. Lilly's connection with the dispatcher had dropped, and with it the hikers' spirits. A sensation of unfairness washed over Lilly as she considered that they had done everything to distract the bear. It couldn't possibly be interested in humans as food, but could only be interested in them as a food source. What more could it want? They dropped everything with a scent that attracted the bear. It was at this point that the hikers noticed that the bear was slowly closing the short distance between them. Town positioned himself between Lilly and the bear. His 3-inch knife blade would be very little protection against an animal whose hide was designed to resist claws of about the same length. He continued to yell at the bear, and his voice was getting hoarse as they continued their retreat down the trail. The desperation the hikers were feeling mounted as the bear stalked to within 8 feet of them. That is when Lilly realized that Town's knife wasn't the only weapon they could use to defend themselves. She noticed they were standing on a very rocky part of the trail and bent over to retrieve a handful of golf ball-sized rocks. Taking his cue from Lilly, Town reached down and grabbed his own small arsenal of rocks. The hikers began pelting the bear and likely didn't miss much from only 8 feet away. At last, a break in the focus of the bear appeared as it retreated a short distance up the trunk of a tree along the trail. Town and Lilly used this break in the bear's stalk toward them to put more distance between him and them. After only a few seconds, the bear dropped back down to the trail and continued its methodical stalk toward the hikers. Now having formulated a rudimentary strategy to defend themselves, the hikers played out their role in a play that had likely been performed countless times over the eons. The bear would advance on them, and they would throw rocks at it, driving it back from them. With each rock that thumped into the bear's ribs, they could see it begin to doubt whether stalking them was worth the risk, but it continued to return nonetheless. The shortest route to the protection of civilization took Lilly and Town right through the closed section of the trail and past Matt's Creek shelter. Lilly would glance back behind them as they hiked and noticed that the distance between them and the bear's glowing eyes was increasing. By the time the hikers had crossed the bridge and climbed the shoulder on the side of the highway, they'd covered 3 miles while being stalked by the bear. They glanced up and down the dark highway, hoping to see a waiting deputy, but there was nothing. There was no cell reception either, so calling for help was out of the question. It was now about 11:15 p.m., and they knew their only option was to head toward Glasgow, so they began hiking through the dark. At least they felt safer hiking along the road. There would certainly be someone driving by soon, and hopefully they would get a ride into town. It wasn't long before headlights appeared from around the bend, and Lilly waved her cell phone, hoping to get the car to pull over. It roared right past them, likely too afraid to pick up hitchhikers in the middle of the night. Town was still carrying his knife in his hand when another car appeared coming from the opposite direction. The driver pulled over to the shoulder and asked Lilly to approach his vehicle, likely uncertain of just what was going on with them. After some serious consideration, the driver confessed that he couldn't leave them out here in good conscience, and agreed to take them to town. Lilly and Town managed to secure a sleeping spot at the hostel in town called Stanimals. In the morning they met with Ranger Brian Wilson. They all agreed to go back to their campsite to retrieve their backpacking gear they had discarded in their retreat. Ranger Wilson grabbed his pump-action shotgun loaded with slugs, and the trio headed up the trail together. About a half-mile from their previous campsite, the ranger pointed out some food wrappers in the trail. Lilly sheepishly explained that those were hers, and she'd discarded them as the bear followed them down the trail the night before. Continuing up the trail, the group located one of Town's shoes. It had a clear puncture hole through the toe where one of the bears tested its taste. A short distance further they found Town's backpack he'd discarded in the trail to distract the bear. The same one they had watched the bear step over as it stalked them. His pack was now torn up and its contents strewn about. As the group climbed the remaining trail section of their campsite, they began to wonder what damage may have been done to their belongings. Upon arriving, they could see that their food cache was completely untouched, and the ranger indicated that their food was properly cached, possibly too well. It appeared that the bears had opted for easier food than the food cache offered. Upon examining their tent, they could see both of the hikers' sleeping pads were punctured, and Lily's toiletry bag was ripped apart and scattered just outside. Their sleeping bags were slashed in places, and Town's more so than Lily's. The tent had clear claw marks from the bear's paws striking at it after they'd fled. As Ranger Wilson took pictures of the campsite, he pointed out that just beyond the tent's ground cloth was a large bear print in the duff. He indicated that this situation was very dangerous and may have ended up very badly for the hikers. He informed them that they were nearly a Netflix documentary. Reacting to the aggressive nature of the bears, AT authorities increased the closed area to keep people from entering the bear's location. Ranger Wilson indicated that the bear near their tent was a large sow, and that the bear that had followed them through the trees was a 2-year-old bear. It was likely not as big as the sow, but certainly large enough to harm or kill unarmed people. Trail authorities decided to wait until the berry season started before relocating the bears. Given this was the second time they'd responded to these bears behaving aggressively toward hikers, their actions may be too little, too late someday. Lilly and Town continued on their AT adventure through the next few nights, though the next few nights were not comfortable, given that they had to sleep on their deflated sleeping pads. Lilly blogged about their hike along the AT, and if you are interested in reading it, I've linked to it at the bottom of the video article below. I'm sure they would appreciate any support you care to offer. After reviewing the details of this episode, I have a few questions for you. Given that the bears returned to the items Town and Lilly discarded, do you think that indicates a predatory nature to this confrontation? Would you have remained in the tent or fled? Would you have finished hiking the AT after having such a harrowing run-in with bears? I will gladly read and respond to your thoughts, so please post them in the comments section below, and let's talk about it. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us back to the same location as our prior episode, the Tuscarora Trail Overlook in Duthat State Park in Virginia. The steep hills of this park are packed with dense, mixed forests of evergreens and deciduous trees. The deciduous trees drop their leaves each fall, which forms a crunchy and insulating layer along the ground. This layer performs an important function in the habitat, but we will not get into that in this video. The evergreen trees here include pine, fir, spruce, and hemlock trees, which create a dark environment that allows predators to sneak up on prey very easily. With white-tailed deer and turkeys wandering the underbrush, life here is easy for the bobcats, coyotes, and black bears with plenty to eat. As reported in the prior episodes, Virginia hosts 17,000 black bears, which is likely not going down, despite the state's broad hunting seasons. Unlike black bears in the western states, bears in Virginia are almost always black in color, and they lack any variation in their color. On the afternoon of September 17, 2017, a woman whom we will refer to as Carol was out for a relaxing hike through the beautiful mountains of the park with her 2 dogs. Duke and Daisy trotted along the trailside, sniffing anything that presented an alluring scent and obediently answering Carol's calls to them. For several miles, the dogs kept Carol company and alertly watched for anything that interested them. They undoubtedly smelt deer and raccoons as they braided their paths along the trail, but on this day, one scent seemed to elude their sensitive noses for an unknown reason. Spending much of the day making their way toward the overlook just past the peak of the trail, Carol and her dogs were now a few hours and numerous miles into their hike. I could find no source confirming that Carol carried bear spray or a firearm on this hike, so it is believed she carried neither. Sometimes as people and dogs get tired, they begin to lose attention to fine details. At first, hikers are alert and watching for anything out of place or different. After a few thousand steps, important clues may be missed. As Carol and her dogs approached the overlook about 1 p.m., they must have walked right past a very dangerous observer concealed by the brush near the trail. It isn't clear whether the black bear had followed them unnoticed down the trail or if it had suddenly appeared behind them. Hiking down the trail, Carol was staring ahead of her when she was driven forward and onto her face. The impact came from nowhere and briefly disoriented Carol, but the searing pain and pressure of a hungry black bear's teeth being driven into the flesh of her lower leg brought her back to reality. As Carol rolled to her side, she could see a black bear latched onto her leg and started to kick at the bear with her other leg. As the bear slashed her legs with its paws while it tried to fend off her kicks, the puncture wounds in her legs tore and bled. After a couple of well-placed kicks to the bear's head, it switched its attack to her other leg. It caught her lower leg in its jaws and shook its head to set its teeth deep in her flesh. Thoughts of what to do must have raced through her mind as she determined how to handle this violent attack. Carol kicked and yelled as the bear bit into her legs over and over while it clawed and gashed them. She knew this bear was not defending itself, as it came from behind to attack her. Realizing this was a fight for her life, Carol resolved to fight to the end. As the bear bit and tore at Carol's legs, her dogs ran around, barking and charging toward the bear. Their dashing and darting confused the bear and distracted it from killing Carol. With so much energy and resistance, the bear's resolve began to wane. It released its grip on Carol's legs and darted back into the brush, leaving her bleeding and in pain on the ground. As her dogs chased after the bear a short distance, Carol pulled herself together. The last thing she knew, she was enjoying the beautiful scenery, and the next thing she knew, she was sitting here after such a sudden and brutal attack. Carol pulled her legs underneath her and stood to her feet. The adrenaline had dulled the pain of the puncture and claw wounds on her legs, but that didn't last. She could see her blood trickling from wounds that hurt, and wondered if she should sit and wait for another hiker to come along, or risk returning down the same trail she'd just been ambushed on. After some consideration, she knew that waiting would leave her in the same area as the aggressive bear, and that was a risk she was unwilling to take. She decided that enduring the pain she felt with each step was more tolerable than the thought of waiting. Slowly, Carol began working her way down the trail, while calling to her dogs. They'd returned from chasing the bear and seemed uninjured. After a few hours of painful limping her way down the trail, Carol emerged at the trailhead, and her vehicle parked there. Somehow she managed to get through to emergency services and requested first responders to her location. Carol was transported to the same hospital that Laura Cooksey was treated at, Lewis Gale Hospital, Allegheny. Her gashes and puncture wounds were cleaned and closed with an undisclosed number of stitches after she was transferred to the Roanoke Memorial Hospital. Over the next few weeks, Carol would make a full recovery. Wildlife officials would initiate a comprehensive search for the bear, and due to the predatory nature of the attack, decided it would have to be euthanized. DNA evidence from the bear was collected from Carol's wounds for comparison with other bears they suspected of her attack. They noted that rabies could be a factor in Carol's attack. During Carol's recovery, the park system took care of her family cabin in the area and her dogs. They expressed wishes for a speedy recovery for her after experiencing such a violent, unprovoked attack. Officials closed the trails in the park as they searched for the bear. There was no indication in any of the sources I could find on this attack whether the bear was ever located or killed. Following the attack, officials released a public announcement advising hikers and campers to remain calm if they encounter a bear. They also stated that hiking during dawn or dusk hours may increase the likelihood of running into a bear. Making noise near streams and brushy areas may help avoid surprising a bear. Keeping your children close to you may ensure their safety. When you confront a bear, appear as large as possible and make noise while retreating slowly. Given Carol was hiking when she was attacked from behind, this advice had limited value in preventing it. She was ambushed at midday and wasn't near a stream or an area of dense brush, or at least any more dense than the rest of her surroundings. A predatory attack like this one has an element of unpredictability, and no amount of precaution or preparation would have prevented it. After reviewing the facts surrounding this episode, I'm left with a few questions for you. What could Carol have done differently to avoid or prevent this attack? Is Virginia developing into a hotspot for bear attacks, like other regions? Why didn't Carol's dogs pick up on the bear's presence before it attacked her? What do you think you would do if you were thrown to your face by the impact of a surprise bear attack? I'll be glad to read and respond to your thoughts, so please post them in the comments section below, and let's talk about it. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us to the Tuscarora Overlook Trail in Duthat State Park near Millboro, Virginia. The hills here stretch about 3,200 feet in elevation, which is high for the Appalachian Range. They're covered in dense growths of oak, maple, and hickory trees that drop their leaves each fall. The evergreens here include pine, fir, spruce, and hemlock trees with pawpaw, black willow, dogwood, and magnolia bushes displaying their brilliant flowers and fruits to keen observers from any species. Wild game animals here include white-tailed deer and turkeys, but raccoons and skunks are also common. Predators in this area include bobcats, coyotes, and black bears. According to the Duthat Park Trail Guide linked below, the Tuscarora Overlook Trail runs several miles into the forest on the west side of the park. It executes hairpins in the trail wherever it climbs, granting hikers amazing views. The emerald greenery shimmers down the valley as the breezes rustle the leaves, like they're under some kind of magic spell. Around 5:30 p.m. on Saturday, August 8, 2015, 52-year-old Lori Cooksey was hiking the trail and enjoying the outdoors with her family. Along with Lori were her children. Ellis, who was age 19, Hannah was age 16, and Blake was age 22. All enjoyed being active with their mother. It wasn't long into the hike before energetic Ellis disappeared ahead of the other three group members. The dips and turns in the trail created new sights and adventures for the hikers, and the fresh air invigorated them. The family was close and had gone on several hiking adventures together in the past, but today's events would cast a new light on the possibilities the forest presents. Their plans had consisted of hiking treks mixed in with paddling a canoe in the reservoirs in the area. There was nothing in the sources that indicated that they had brought bear spray or a firearm on their hike that day, so it's accepted they had brought neither. Ellis was ahead of the group when a small black bear showed itself on the trail ahead of him. The bear was partially concealed behind a small pine tree, but quickly began to slowly and steadily stalk toward the group. The hikers had already reached the peak in the trail and were on their descent when they ran into the bear. It was only 15 feet away from Ellis and suddenly rose to its hind legs as if it were comparing its size with the young man's. With his mother arriving and standing beside him, Ellis was in a quandary about precisely how to handle the situation. You see, Ellis has always held a deep-seated fear of bears. On each hike they've gone on, they used 3 owl hoots as a universal alert of a bear sighting as an inside joke, more than anything serious. As she looked at the bear, Lori could see a strange look in the bear's eyes. She stated that she and Ellis wouldn't soon forget that look. I've seen this look in person and up close in run-ins with black bears in Idaho. That look is that of absolute indifference, as the animal seemingly calculates the calories expended versus the calories spent, or the risk of injury gathering those calories. The economy of calories that bears have to tally is one that pits a prey animal versus a predator, and the reconciliation of an equation in which no person wants to be on the short side. Ellis and Lori couldn't help but break formation and run for their lives. The look the bear had given them shook them to their core, and instilled terror. As the duo fled, the bear seemed to anticipate their route and cut them off. It had spent its entire life either learning how to or practicing catching up on its prey, and this prey wasn't fleet of foot. Lori was trailing Ellis as they ran from the bear, which put her first in line to be caught by it. The bear chuffed as it closed in on her and swatted her in the small of her back, opening up several gashes in her flesh. Seeing no other alternative, they flung themselves down the steep mountainside, hoping that the bear would give up and leave them alone. That day had been a rainy one, and the mud and moist foliage helped the hikers as they slid downhill on their rear ends. Given gravity has her way with any body of mass, they were soon tumbling more than they were sliding. This tactic didn't confuse or discourage the bear, as it immediately pursued them in their downhill escape. As the bear caught up to Lori, it sank its teeth into the back of her knee and shook its head violently. The wounds it opened up are too graphic for YouTube standards, so I've posted them on my Patreon link, posted below. They're not the worst we display there, but reveal the power and devastation these predators can impart on their victims. Now realizing she may be fighting for her life, Lori kicked viciously at the bear. She put so much ticked-off mama power behind her kicks that the small sow bear slipped on the mud and rolled onto her back. This gave Ellis and Lori space and time to flee once again. As the hikers fled back up the trail, they screamed at Blake and Hannah, telling them to run. At one point, Lori turned and punched the bear, exhibiting her own mama bear power to defend her cubs. Blake had recently graduated from the College of William and Mary and approached the situation with a more academic mindset. Initially, he thought of the cries for help as a prank, but soon realized they were not made in vain. Seeing the blood on his mother's wounds confirmed the seriousness of the situation to him. As soon as the bear came into view, Blake tapped into his nature buff library of bear battling tactics. He told the other family members to get loud and get big. Whether he knew this was a predatory attack or not was not indicated in any source I could find, but his advice was solid gold. In an act of unison, they each began to yell and jump around like a pack of enraged cavemen. They threw sticks up into the air and raised their hands above their heads in a show of force. Upon seeing this group of humans standing their ground and clearly choosing to fight, or at least acting like they were, the sow stopped and examined the group for a few seconds. She seemed unsure if it was worth it, as that accounting of calories she'd been tabulating since the beginning of this attack was no longer in her favor. The noise and demonstration put on by the family convinced her to seek easy food in another place. She turned slowly and ambled off into the brush on the side of the trail. As soon as the sow had left the trail and disappeared from view, the 4 hikers turned tail and booked it the entire 4 miles remaining on their return to the trailhead. The children marveled at Lori's ability to complete the journey despite her wounds, but when you have a warrior for a mom, it's kind of expected. The shock of the event would have left me a mumbling mess. Lori was taken to the hospital where her wounds were cleaned before being closed with 14 stitches in her back and 14 more in her leg. On top of that, she received rabies and tetanus shots just to make sure she didn't contract either disease from her wounds, all while being treated at Lewis Gale Hospital, Allegheny. The Virginia Department of Game and Inland Fisheries and Department of Conservation and Recreation law enforcement officers tracked the black bear aided by a wildlife biologist. They set out traps and baits to lure the bear out of hiding. The bear was found near the attack site and humanely dispatched at 4 p.m. Sunday, August 9th, 2015. As Lori convalesced in the hospital, her friends regaled her with deliveries of bear claw donuts and beer. Lori indicates that she doesn't blame the bear, despite its predatory actions toward her and her family. She also says that this event would keep her out of the woods, and that she doesn't plan on going back into bear country anymore. Lori finalized her sentiments with a statement regarding how the bear attack was surreal. The brave mother is glad the bear attacked her instead of her children. Virginia wildlife officials comment that there are 17,000 black bears in the state, and that attacks are very rare. They report that bear and human interactions are very few on record and consist primarily of the bear disappearing in a cloud of dust at the sight of a person. As for the bear, it turns out she was the mother of 2 9-month-old cubs who were orphaned due to the outcome of this attack. They would stand little to no chance of survival without their mother, and there is no record of agency trying or succeeding in capturing her cubs. They left no comment as to the overall health or age of the sow. After reviewing the details of this attack, I'm left with a few questions for you. Do you think the governmental agencies were justified in euthanizing this black bear sow? Would the black bear have tried to tangle with another human after being kicked and punched by such a protective mama? Was this family's behavior the only way to stop a predatory black bear attack? I'll be glad to read and reply to your thoughts, so please post them in the comments section below, and let's talk about it. Thank you for watching Scary Bear Attacks. If you've enjoyed this episode, please consider clicking on the like button and clicking on the bell icon. We'll help you know when we post our new episodes. Posting our video links to your social media profiles furthers awareness, and it's fun. We slashed our prices in our merch store, linked below, so check out the bargains there while you shop. As a member of our human community, remember to adventure bravely and be careful out there, especially in bear country.